from the Dockside Conference Room at Darling Harbour, and it's thrilled to have some really special guests here who I'll introduce you to in a second. And good evening to those of you tuning in from the east coast of the USA. Good afternoon to those on the west coast. Good evening to anyone who's hanging on in Europe, and bright and early morning to the rest of us in the Asia Pacific area. We're so thrilled to be here this morning for this Plus Social Good Y20 Google Hangout, and to give you some live updates from the incredible evening that our delegates had, coming to some final policy conclusions for their communique. So we'll talk about that in a second, but first of all I want to introduce you to everyone here. In fact, I'll let you introduce yourselves actually, and I'll start down with you, Christian, if you could just give us a little bit of information about yourself and why you're here.
My name is Christian Robertson. I'm part of the South African delegation. I'm on the Committee of Sustainable Development, and we're here to represent the youth of a whole continent. So hello to everyone there in Africa if you're listening.
Great. My name is Holly Ransom. I've had the privilege of being able to serve as the co-chair of the Y20 this year. So my role is stewarding the process at large, ensuring that we get to an outcomes-based communique, and then advocating on behalf of all G20 youth up to G20 leaders.
Hi all, good day to you all, and this is Prabhu Shankar. I'm from India, and I'm in the Committee on Global Citizenship. It's been a wonderful time out here, and I'm a doctor by qualification, and I specialize in public health. Right now I work for the government. I'm in Indian Administrative Service.
So thrilled and honoured to have you all here. And just forgive me, I will be checking my phone a little bit during our conversation so I can see anything on Twitter. So I apologise for that. But Holly, I want to start with you, and I would love you to give us a sense of the Y20 scope, its responsibilities, and hopes.
Right, so I mean, the Y20 is the official youth dialogue of the G20. So back when the global financial crisis hit in 2008, and the G20 was elevated to a leaders summit, there was a conscious effort made by leaders to reach out and engage with key groups in society, business, civil society, young people. So acknowledge that without their input and without their collective effort, we couldn't get the global financial system back on track. So since then, the Y20 has been around, and so 6 years now, has been growing in its, I guess, traction that it's received every year and the quality with which it's producing its communiques. We had an interesting process, I guess, when we started the presidency under the Australian host of the G20, because there's a real focus on pragmatism and being succinct this year. So the leaders themselves will only be producing a 3-page communique in the Leaders Summit in Brisbane. So we really wanted to frame up a succinct, outcomes-focused Y20 communique that made it really clear to leaders what it is that young people around the G20 wanted. So we chose to focus on 3 key themes that kind of tracked against the G20 agenda. So growth and jobs, which I was moderating, global citizenship and mobility, which Carlton was in, and Christian represented the Sustainable Development Group. So we had 3 streams of policy making that have been running online for some months now, and then that picked up where they left off online at the summit itself. And to your point about, hopes, I mean, from our end, our particular focus this year has been on youth unemployment. We see this as the unified point of hurt across the G20. Now push has been to see real political capital devoted to that issue at the G20 level. So we want to see outcomes and an action plan committed to by leaders this year around a collective target for youth employment creation, and then individual measures within country plans for how they're going to address the challenge.
That sounds absolutely fantastic, and it's been thrilling to be an observer the last few days and really get a sense of the depth and experience and quality of delegate in this room. And I've got to tell you, it leaves me incredibly hopeful for the future of the planet, knowing the calibre of leadership that we have in this room, going back to your countries. Just before we move on to the next part of our conversation, I want to let you all know that we are following along on Twitter. There's a hashtag where you can get a lot of fantastic snippets from the Y20 conversation. It's hashtag Y20AUS, hashtag Y20AUS, and I'll dig in now to see if we can grab some questions from there throughout our conversation. And also, it might be a great idea to follow at Y20AUS also. Now, I'll start with you, Christian, and then I'll come back to you, Prado. Why did you decide to become part of the Y20 team, and what were your personal hopes coming into the summit?
I decided to become part of the Y20 team because I've for a long time been passionate about youth and also hopeful that we can mobilize and together globally and domestically, regionally, work towards, as Holly was talking about, practical solutions for our world. Also, it's a great opportunity to come to Australia and be part of a very prestigious event like this. My hope on that front is, well, it was quite difficult to represent the voice of the youth of a whole continent, but we tried hard before the event to engage on social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter, and well, the hope is that we just we did our best, and we're going to go back and see what we've learned from here, and what we can do about those acute issues and problems in Africa.
Thank you.
From a youth perspective.
Yeah, absolutely, understand. Probably over to you.
Yeah, it was very similar to what Chris had undergone. It was, but the difference here was I was selected by the government to represent the country's voice in the Y20 summit, and we really took it a golden opportunity to represent the needs and aspirations of the youth. And as you know, we really have a buzzing youth population in our country, and it was so appropriate for us to be here. And we were undergoing training in an academy in the Administrative Service Academy of our country. And me and my friend Mayu were there. And it was really a nice opportunity because that gave us a single platform where I could, because it was a place where there were people from across my country. It's a subcontinent. It's a country, but it's so huge and diverse. And just to represent the needs and aspirations of the youth in my country is really a tough ask. And that being in the academy really helped because in that way I could really get my friends' opinion, and we also use the media platform, the social media platform, to good use, and behavior. And it was really good that we could really cross the table some of our views and thoughts and work along with friends across the globe and finally arrive at a consensus over a lot of issues. So that way it really feels good.
And Holly, for you?
Oh, look, I mean, I think as I said at the start, the goal from my end, a process like this, we just think it's so critical that there's a strong youth voice at the table. I mean, we said at the opening ceremony the other day that 50% of the world's population are under 30 right now. The importance of that group being represented at a dialogue like this, particularly because I think two things. One is that a lot of the challenges we're tackling, from climate change through to these structural levels of unemployment, are intergenerational challenges that you need to make sure you have a sustainable approach to, and that involves having multiple generations at the table, thinking about how we tackle it. And I think the second thing is the disproportionate impact that a lot of the decision making of these groups has on young people. We know that disproportionately young people face a lot of economic and social challenges. And so we think it's really critical to have a strong voice at the table. So from my end, it was about ensuring that we created a process this year of engaging all these 25 countries, the 20 representatives of the G20, and then our 6 observer nations, 5 of which are here with us, to make sure that we could get the greatest traction for their voice possible at the G20 level, and to ensure that when leaders meet in Brisbane, that they have within their field of view on each of the issues on the table the youth input available and part of what they're considering. That was the goal for us.
Well, and we talk about 50% of the world's population being young people, but for the African continent and the Indian subcontinent, it's even bigger than that. I don't know what the data is specifically for South Africa, but I believe for India it's something like 65% of your population is between 16 and 33 years of age. That's a completely different set of issues than perhaps some of the other G20 partners who are dealing with aging populations. And so your perspective is going to be very, very different. I would love to get a sense from each of you of what your country's expectations are from you, and then how do you, in your fellow delegates, there's 5 delegates from each nation, how do you go about reporting back? What's the process look like for that? I'll start with you.
So, as you rightly said, our conditions are different, the problems there are quite different, and just the priorities as well differ as well. So when we came here, as we were getting the views of a lot of youth across the country, it was like any other to start with. So it was like we need jobs because the population here is huge, and we have as a developing country we are a labor excess country. So we have issues really, especially regarding this concept of global mobility. The global talent mobility is something our country has specific issues with. And the other things regarding the sustainable development, we as a country have been, we have 30% of our population who is below the poverty line. And it just looks 30%, but when you translate into absolute numbers, it is just huge because our population is 1.3 billion. So when it comes to our priorities, any discussion would always start on equity. Equity should be an important part in any of the discussions. So a sustainable development along with equitable common but differentiated responsibilities has always been our priority and our stress area. And the next thing was we had, as I said, we have a lot of interest in the global citizenship because we have a really young and skilled, highly skilled professional people in our country. Let's say take IT, which is really has been booming in our country for a decade now. And we in healthcare too, we have a really, we have a lot of highly qualified skilled youth. So like we had some issues over this mobility thing, and it was a wonderful platform for us to really put across our views with let's say mutual recognition of education degrees and qualifications. And there are some issues with regarding to visas. There were some issues with regarding to social security contributions. And our focus has been of late on a sustainable balanced growth because we have still we 70% of our India lives in villages. So we have unique issues wherein we need to address the unique concerns of the rural population and the rural youth. So it's been a wonderful experience, and we could just really work along with even members from the developed country because this world is not that it is being unfair to all. It's like a complementary world. As we said, we were just discussing with Holly the issues in Australia. It's like an aging population. That's likewise the same in other developed countries as well. So we can complement each other. This world is here where we can actually complement each other. So that's the good part about it. And
I have a follow-up question, and Holly and Chris, feel free to jump on this one. But from Twitter, John Curtis Smith has been a fantastic supporter of the Y20 conversation this weekend. So huge shout out to you, John. He mentioned that Russia's Y20 proposed a G20 jobs database in their communique last year. Do you think that would help?
The British me?
Yeah, so we'll to any of you, but if we start with you, probably.
Maybe Chris can do talking like
Sure.
Go ahead. I'm putting you all on this one.
Yeah, it would definitely help, especially for those interested in working across borders. Obviously, there's a whole bunch of problems that comes towards that. Having that database is obviously in terms of the data itself, information is good and available to all countries is a great opportunity. But then there's the actual the practical way about it, or how making use of it. So I think something like that would need to be supported with other things that we've tried to introduce here at the Australian presidency of this Y20 summit, of ways to support something like a database. And I think what we've been focusing on, labour mobilities, actually speaks to that.
To take your question a slightly different way too, and John, big thank you for the enormous support over the last couple of months, let alone this week. But to Christian's point around having the data and the evidence, that's one of the things that's been a really interesting challenge for the Y20 full stop, because within the G20, particularly given it originates from a finance ministers forum, it is an entirely evidence-based game. And so one of the things that's been really interesting for us, particularly on the issue of youth employment, is just how challenging it's been to get consistent data, to get even numbers regarding the number of G20 youth. I mean, there's a real lack of the evidence base on this issue. And so a lot of what we've been talking about is how do we actually improve that? How do we build in accountability measures? Because some of these sorts of initiatives, like we're not even able to fully articulate the case because the background work hasn't been done. So that's another point I think too about the need for these sorts of issues, everything from a jobs database through to actually getting really across the issue and ensuring that the G20 is working from an evidence-based position. Really important.
If I could just add one more thing, probably I'll keep it short. We've been asked to not echo the same sentiments that were spoken about in the last Y20 summit, So I urge John Curtis Smith to follow up himself on mobilizing people himself with the support that we're willing to give as well on that specific part. But I think our responsibility is to move those forward, these ideas that we've had from the past Y20 summits, and to bring them, as we were saying, to a more practical arena.
So I'm really interested too, Prado, you already addressed this a little bit, but Holly and Christian, if you've got anything to add, what's the reporting back process? How do you take what you've done here over these few days and continuing on today back to your countries?
So in South Africa, we had this thing called the Y20 model meeting, and it was held in Cape Peninsula University of Technology. So we would need someone to report back to. So before we left, we had engagement not just on social media platforms, but and on this model meeting with a whole bunch of youth that are in the political arena, but also just passionate about change, positive change. So what we're planning to do, what we did in fact at the beginning, was write up a background paper, a collaborative background paper with the youth. There in South Africa, here we obviously could do it with the whole of Africa. But what we're going to do is we're going to report back on how that differs with the final communique that all the Y20s are going to draw up together, and we're going to see how we can specifically implement projects. Again, we're talking about practical, action-oriented solutions. How we can implement those kind of projects in our contextual arena again in South Africa. And then again, I suppose we're going to do another paper. And as I've been speaking to a lot with a lot of the delegates here, this is just the beginning of the summit. And it would be great if there was a structure of some kind of wiki structure where we can support each other's developments, the projects that we've been doing, because this is a great opportunity to network and to exchange knowledge and information, and that exchange can't stop. And with the likes of the internet, we can continue.
And I think that's one of the things that we really saw the opportunity for when we took over the presidency of the G20. Was strengthening changing actually the way that we viewed what the Y20 was, which took it from being a summit to taking it to being, leading a 12-month policy conversation on behalf of local young people that happened to involve the summit. This is like the iceberg moment where we pop above the surface and we get a bit of media activity, we bring everyone physically together. But the work that's been happening by our delegates in the months prior with engaging their young people with developing policy, and the work that's going to happen launching today, what we're going to do is spend a day working on upskilling all of our delegates around key advocacy skill sets, and then building country action plans, which are really focused on how do we go back to our countries and engage young people effectively, what we've talked about here, getting them mobilised behind the ideas that we've generated, and then secondly, how do we actually get it to the table in front of leaders? Because everyone's got a stake in how successfully we get this on the G20 agenda, and it's going to be through that collective effort of all of us we're going to see that happen.
Just to add to Chris and Molly, but just like to say, my country, you could just say how serious my government is viewing this Y20 summit, because they have 10 government officers. We have 2 bureaucrats here, 2 Indian administrative service officers here, and there are 2 police officers here, and there's an NSS volunteer. So that's the level of seriousness with which my government views this Y20 summit. And in a way that helps. Working for the government in a way helps at how I could really translate the communiques into real action and policy. Because back home, when I go back, I'll be sending a report to we have a Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports in my country, which is actually the nodal ministry for this event. And we are really going to take into all relevant ministries and departments in the government. And we will be having engagements. In our country, we have a wonderful system of engaging the youth in all the deliberations, and there's an active youth citizenship. And really, that's going to help. And we'll find innovative ways to make the policy recommendations ready to the youth.
Thank you. And Chris, I know one of your colleagues also is a government official and a youth government official, and will be taking things back directly to Parliament, which is really helpful as well. Holly, I want to get a sense from you a little bit about, just quickly about the process that you engaged in specifically yesterday in the voting conversations, And then, like, how applicable is that to the real G20 process?
Yeah, so as I said, we had a unique situation this year where the bar had been set by the presidency, with the finance ministers and the Prime Minister announcing they would only be making a 3-page communique, which then sent the requirement for really succinct communiques to be coming out of each of the engagement groups. And so early in the year, we made the call that we would also have a 3-page communique, and in order to do that, it'd be a maximum of 5 clauses coming through from our 3 streams. We also, I should add, presented 3 priority policy recommendations to Sherpas and finance deputies a few weeks ago, which really centred on youth entrepreneurship, some of the global mobility work around recognition of education and training qualifications, and also some quality jobs recommendations. But really for us, it was about creating a process that would ensure that we had 5 really robust but pragmatic clauses getting through on the floor of the plenary that we held last night. And so that began months ago on Yammer. We started with talking about original ideas and actually framing the conversation on what priority recommendations we wanted to put to that conversation with Sherpas and finance deputies. When that conversation closed, we then recommenced discussions in each of the 3 streams. We led this competition of ideas, and it was amazing to watch the way our delegates collaborated and debated and discussed everything. We also held teleconferences with a kind of head delegate from each of the delegations every Saturday for probably the last 3-4 months, for about an hour and a half each time. And that was again going through the policy side, ensuring we were all on the same page about what we were working to create. And then we broke into subcommittees. So each delegation nominated their delegates to sit in one of the 3 substreams. Had 5, so obviously some delegations had more than 1. And really what it was there was we started with all the list of what had been proposed on Yammer, and it was a conversation around, well, what are we prioritising here? What is it that we can combine in and collaborate, and what are the strongest 5 clauses that we want to go forward with and ensure the G20 hears us on? And so it was great to see last night the clauses come to the floor and overwhelmingly enjoy the broad support of the room. And just to see that collaborative process, it's such a credit to the way the delegates have worked. It's been phenomenal.
It's very exciting, and I have to say I wasn't allowed to observe some of those conversations for obvious reasons, but I was glued to the Twitter stream late last night at Sydney time, and it was very exciting, I've got to tell you. So part of the reason it was really exciting was that there were some hard things to come to consensus on. What was the toughest issue, if you like, that really sort of stretched the room in coming together?
I think that would go to your subgroup. Do you want to talk about what happened in sustainable development?
Sure. The specific issue that we were talking about, the specific theme was around energy. So what started out with 5 separate proposals on energy spoke to energy production, energy supply, energy infrastructure, and fossil fuel subsidies, the transition to renewable energies, and so on. Well, as we say, we had to boil it down to 5 things, and we weren't just talking about, we weren't only just to talk about energy. We had some really important themes and topics that we had to do away with, like waste management, which is a real issue, especially when it comes to plastics in the seas. But we had to make these into concessions, I don't know if that's the right word, but compromises, sure, like that, and so that we could all come to a consensus and be happy together with something that we want to give the G20 leaders. So with the energy one, luckily we were privileged to have a bunch of people that had been working on policy development for a while, and a lot of it had to just do with semantics. We were talking about on either side, we tried to put down all the 5 into one, and then we had quite a few issues with that because we felt it was a bit too broad and it wasn't action-oriented enough, it wasn't specific enough, and we thought it would just look too bland. So then it was split to 2, and then we kind of had 2 sides of the room kind of lobbying each other, and it got very political. With developed countries and developing countries and regional and all that kind of thing. But what happened in the end was we really did work together on what we specifically wanted to talk about regarding energy. and it took a little bit out of every proposal, every specific particular of the energy debate that we were all talking about. A lot of things, as I said, were left along the side and whatever. But I think what we ended up with was better than we expected to, because we did have to realize that it's our problems are not just about energy. We've got to realize that things is interrelated and interconnected systems and all that. So I'm happy with the end result. It was tough though.
And credit to the group, where they started might have been like that, but it passed the overwhelming majority last night. So incredible outcome, the diplomatic process.
One of the most powerful pieces of advice I heard on the opening day of the summit was really look at the deep structural issues behind each of your problems, but make sure you're offering the G20 pragmatic solutions that are implementable in the real world. And so it sounds like you've taken that to heart and really applied that.
I think one of the reasons we've structured the summit program the way we've done, we've had plenary speakers on each of the topics. We've had panelists that cut the issue from a number of different viewpoints, and had opportunities not only for delegates but for our international viewers who streamed it live to ask questions. So to the best of our ability, we could litmus test our causes and our policy proposals before we produced a communique. So the idea being that, versus coming out with something that no one's seen and we haven't had any feedback or a sounding board on, we could get as many touch points on that free and ensure that it's as strong a cause as it can be.
Getting close to time, and there's a couple of key issues that I wanted to fit in before we go. And just reminding you again, the hashtag is hashtag Y20AUS, Y20AUS. Holly, I heard repeatedly in the jobs discussions that we've got to include entrepreneurial life. And you've got some developments in that area to talk to us about today.
Yeah, so excitingly, this is our first priority recommendation under at large that we took to Sherpas and Finance Deputies a few weeks ago. We saw this need to empower SMEs and young entrepreneurs, small and medium enterprises, forgive me, the acronym world. But we really saw that come through again strongly in the jobs and growth. And I mentioned in the lack of an evidence base, or the need to strengthen that to better articulate the case, what we're talking about there. So for the last little while, we've been working in conjunction with the G20 YEA, so they're the Young Entrepreneurs Alliance. They're one of the unofficial summits of the G20, but have had an ongoing presence within the G20 broader network for a number of years. And so we've partnered with them to produce a one-pager. So the two of us are working on what we call hashtag United Voice, which is around not only youth unemployment, but the need for entrepreneurship and youth entrepreneurship to be a key pillar of the solution. And later today, as of this morning, we'll be starting to tweet it live, this one-pager that's our call to action to both leaders of the United Nations regarding the Sustainable Development Goals and needing to entrench youth employment and entrepreneurship within that goals framework, but also this call to action to the G20 leaders on what we've been putting forward and pressing them on the measures we want to see in the plan. So it's this real effort, I guess, between the two groups. We represent more than 1.5 billion young people within the G20. They represent over 500,000 entrepreneurs who employ over 10 million people within the G20. So it's a great example of this united front on what we see as an absolutely key issue and also a key solution. So we'll be coming out with that today.
That's hugely exciting. The other thing that I want to congratulate you on in this summit is a really wonderful balance of genders, and the voice of women has been very clear and loud throughout the conversations. Holly, I'll start with you, but how a women's voice is essential to the G20 process, and then for all three of you, what's changing for women in your countries? So I'll start with you, Holly.
Yeah, look, absolutely critical. It's something I'm personally really passionate about, is women decision making and gender equality full stop. And it's something we've been very conscious of, not only wanting to ensure that we've done from a logistics point of view in terms of number of speakers and the way that we've engaged people in our summit, but certainly we're thrilled to have seen it come through as strongly as it has done in the policy recommendations. One of jobs and growth recommendations around female participation and the need to strengthen that. I think increasingly we're seeing countries pick up on the economic opportunity of increasing female participation. I mean, Japan had a great example of seeing that, well, if we can increase female participation up to sort of 50%, we'll add 8% to our GDP. You know, you're at a time where we're trying to work out where the next driver for growth is. We're seeing that female empowerment is such a huge part of that solution. So I think the need to further embrace that is absolutely critical.
Women empowerment is really the key issue for development, like anywhere else. And in my country, you see, political empowerment is really happening. You see, our heads of states have been women, and like it's one of the first few countries where the head of state has been a woman. We had a woman prime minister, we had a woman president, and even in the states, the equivalent of your provinces, we have had the state icon from Tamil Nadu as woman chief minister, and was doing great. And likewise, we have a lot of women chief ministers. There's been a move to reserve 33% in the central parliament, what we call for women. So politically, women are really getting involved, even at the grassroots level. Even at the level of the panchayat, we have a lot of women working, and women are really getting empowered in my country. And economic empowerment is also happening. And if you could see that, just see from my delegation, there were two police women who are ladies who are police officers. So that just summarizes the efforts that have been happening, and the wonderful output has been coming. And as Holly just rightly said, women empowerment is the key, and there cannot be any step further without a focus on that.
Yeah, I mean, to agree with what you guys said about women empowerment is key to development, sustainable development, job growth, all that. I think it's pretty obvious, and we echo what's been said for quite a while now, but I think we also need to emphasize that it's still a huge problem. And so we're going to look about why is it still a problem, and not just saying yes, women. Why aren't women up onto the same level as males yet, men yet? You know, it's a whole bunch of various issues in South Africa. It's partly a cultural thing, and so we have to work through a way about how to respect the culture of specific countries, but also to realize that the importance of lifting women up, or allowing themselves to lift themselves up. What that means, I think, especially in developing countries like South Africa and to an extent India, actually not the same as India, is that we've got to put the right structures in place from a higher level, from an organizational level, from international structure level. But also we've got to really empower those civil societies themselves that are already doing great jobs, but there's just unfortunately a lot of red tape, a lot of bureaucracy that is just slowing and delaying that process. So we just got to identify the champions of women leadership, women empowerment that are already there, and look to what their obstacles and help them. So we've got to speak with them on the same level, and it's male and female people that are working for women empowerment, because as I said just at the beginning, I think it's a consensus throughout.
Just to add to my earlier point, like if we empower men at the level of the family, because the decision making at the family level, we've been models. There's traditionally we've looked at a unitary model of decision making at the household level, but of late we've been realizing that it's women who are actually when women get the decision making part, really the entire the society gets to benefit. And of late we have been designing our policies and programs, or the targeted interventions are targeted in such a way that it empowers the women. That way, it is really a wonderful thing that the governments have realized, and it is really working.
If I could just say one more thing. So we were talking in the Sustainable Development Committee as well about infrastructure and how infrastructure has to be gender inclusive. We've got some comments about but this is going to be too expensive, and Max Hewitt from the Canadian delegation said that I don't think it's controversial when you're speaking to 50% of the population. And I think that's really, we got to almost change the paradigm when we're talking about women empowerment, women leadership, and how we can't let things like finance, although it's an important part of the debate, but we've got to realize that we have to change the game in terms of looking towards women.
And we need that to be a male-female coalition, right? And that's what I'm hearing
So
from.
I'm thrilled to just sit back and listen.
Yeah, I mean, I nothing
Right.
gives me more chills than strong men speaking out in partnership with and for strong women, and that sort of process informing each other. The genders can really work together because that's when women are most powerful. So I just would like to close out right now. I'm going to ask you to give me a tweet-worthy. So you get 140 characters. What's your personal call to action when you walk out of here tomorrow? Kristen, I'll start with you.
Sorry, what's
What's your personal call to action when you walk out of here tomorrow?
My personal call to action would be to not wait, with respect to the government structures and international structures, not wait for them to do the job for you. To go out and follow your passions, follow what you know, do what you know, and just get it honest. Because what we need is both help from the top levels, but also the empowerment from the bottom levels as well. So the people listening to this, watching this, however it works, I'm not sure if Google Hangout works. If I can just, something tweetable in short 140 characters, just go and do it and follow your passions.
Nice. I think my personal call to action is to get G20 youth the traction they deserve with G20 leaders.
Yeah.
I would like to say likewise. But I would say, so maybe I would like to say to the youth, don't worry, we are there for you.
I love that. Don't worry, we're there for you.
But if I can get two tweets, if I can get two
All
tweets.
right.
Everyone get two tweets if they like. Also, just don't stop the conversation. Just keep on going and let's work together.
I kept hearing over these days, raise your voice, raise it again, and that's what this is all about. So that is the collective call to action from this group is to just keep talking, keep doing, and don't be silent. And also just finally to be reassured from some of our high-level guests over the last few days that the G20 is indeed listening. So that's a really essential thing to remember. They have their ear to the ground in this matter. So thank you for joining us. Keep following the hashtag tonight, Y20AUS, and we will see you again.
Cheers.
Grace, I have to turn off the computer now.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you very much. Same.